For 73 consecutive years, Korea has not known peace. It began with an explosion of hostilities in the early 1950s, fought between two nascent Korean states with very different ideas about what their future would be, and with powerful backers on either side who were hell-bent on victory. In the intervening 7 decades, that war was put on ice. But it never truly concluded, and the two dueling Koreas have lived inside a frozen conflict ever since. In the south, rapid modernization and rising material wealth have guaranteed a sophisticated arsenal, one that increasingly features cutting-edge weaponry, advanced ships and planes, and soon, even an aircraft carrier. In the north, a combination of totalitarian rule and Soviet-era weaponry has produced an army well over 1 million strong, a growing nuclear arsenal, and perhaps most dangerous of all, literally hundreds of thousands of Special Forces troops. Meet the Korean People's Army Special Operations Forces, or as we'll refer to them in this video, North Korean Special Forces. Numbering some 200,000 strong, seemingly well-trained, and equipped with the best and most modern equipment the Supreme Leader's money can buy, North Korean Special Forces are among the most mysterious and dangerous weapons in the nation's entire arsenal. In today's installment of our Special Operators series, we're going to explore the nature of the North Korean SOF, explain the missions they exist to carry out, and try to figure out just how much threat they really pose to their neighbors in the South. Even on the most innocuous of subjects, the true nature of life in the Hermit Kingdom is a closely guarded secret, so when trying to give a history of a unit so secretive as the North Korean Special Forces, we won't be able to present all the precise details we would with the Navy SEALs or the British SAS. But even when it comes to these most clandestine of North Korean agents, we do know a fair amount about where they came from and how they got where they are today. The first indicators that North Korea was developing a meaningful Special Forces capability came all the way back in 1966, less than a decade and a half after the armistice that officially ended the Korean War. In that year, North Korea started causing trouble in the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, that separates North Korea from its southern neighbor, launching cross-border raids into the south that were meant to coincide with the war in nearby Vietnam. Then, as now, South Korea was a close ally of the United States, and with the US desperately trying to prop up South Vietnam, the North seemed to see an opportunity to sow chaos across the region. Open another front in America's proxy war, and North Korea, China, and the Soviet Union could have exploited a sudden reversal of fortunes. Unfortunately for North Korea, the raids weren't enough to kick off a renewed Korean war, but their troops still picked up valuable experience ambushing South Korean troops on patrol and garrisoned in outposts. Well over 100 South Korean troops would be killed in the violence in 1966 and 1967, as well as 15 Americans, with hundreds of attacks in total perpetrated by this new North Korean unit. That alone was already a testament to the North Korean skill. After all, the DMZ back then was no less fortified than it is today, presenting a mess of barriers, watchtowers, mines, and enemy patrols that would have demanded some serious expertise for the North Koreans to navigate. Of those several years spent raiding, 3 incidents stand out in particular. First, there was the Blue House Raid, an attempt by the 124th Army Unit, the unit then tasked in North Korea with subversive and guerrilla operations against the South, to assassinate then-dictator of South Korea, Park Chung-hee. In this raid, a total of 31 North Korean troops cut through the fence of the DMZ and infiltrated it, dressed in South Korean military uniforms and each carrying a submachine gun, 8 grenades, a pistol, and an anti-tank mine. From there, they spent 2 days in the DMZ before running into a group of woodcutters who managed to escape and notify South Korean police of their presence. Amidst the ensuing manhunt, Unit 124 made it to the South Korean capital, Seoul, and got within 800 meters of the presidential residence, again relying on their South Korean uniforms to get them through. When a policeman near the residence picked up on their presence, a firefight began, and the manhunt would last for a further 2 days before all but 2 of the North Koreans had been killed. Of the 2 survivors, one made it back to North Korea and even became a general. The other would be imprisoned in South Korea for decades before being pardoned and going on to work as a human rights advisor and religious minister. Equally, if not more ground-shaking, was the event that happened 1 day later when a US Navy spy ship called the USS Pueblo was intercepted in international waters off of the Korean coast. In the attack on the ship, North Korea would kill one American and take the other 82 on board as hostages. Those 82 were then brought back to North Korea, where they spent over a year in custody before the US was able to negotiate their release. And finally, in October of 1968, a force of 120 Special Forces commandos landed near a South Korean village with the goal of building up a popular insurgency against the South. These efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. In the next 2 weeks, South Korea would hunt down all but 3 of the North Koreans who had infiltrated, with the fate of the remaining 3 unknown at that time. But although the incident would represent North Korea's final attempt and failure to infiltrate the South en masse during those years, it was still a powerful reminder of the North's capabilities and their ability to sow chaos in the South. The raids would continue through 1969, and by the time South Korea and the US finally made the DMZ impenetrable at the end of the decade, North Korean troops had gathered the critical expertise they needed to plan and potentially carry out similar attacks. A total of 70 American soldiers and 299 South Korean troops were killed against just under 400 on the North Korean side. Intelligence gleaned from the lone captured member of Unit 124 provided early insight as to what exactly these units were up to. When revelations from that soldier and other captured members were cross-referenced with that of South Korean intelligence, it depicted a shadowy unit made up of some 80 to 90 teams of about 30 operatives each. Those troops were chosen based on their performance in the North Korean armed services, as well as their physical strength, and instructed in marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and doctrinal issues relating to North Korea's particular brand of communism. In that era, South Korea learned North Korean troops are always spending extended stretches of time south of the DMZ, but are basically being sworn off by the leaders of their own nation. Funnily enough, interrogated former operatives consistently reported that their handlers in North Korea had prepared them to be welcomed with open arms by oppressed South Koreans, lusting for a communist answer to all of life's challenges. They also report having been rather surprised by the reality. It's hard to tell precisely what happened to North Korea's budding Special Forces unit after this stretch of time. The so-called Quiet War came to an end. One thing the Special Forces weren't doing, at least for a few decades, was to take part in any highly visible operations that would have revealed more about their development. When they were referenced at all, it was by the sort of grandiose statements then-dictator Kim Il-sung was known for, and his son Kim Jong-il and grandson Kim Jong-un would replicate. When speaking on the North Korean Special Forces during his time as Supreme Leader, Kim Il-sung described them as the strongest elite force of the entire Korean People's Army and the unique vanguard force of the armed forces of the Democratic People's Republic of China. That, of course, doesn't tell us much other than what we'd get from basic semantic analysis, and for many years, it was all the Western world had to go on. The unit could well have developed into an ultra-capable elite spec ops hydra, or it might have been disbanded and used as a prop for the regime's speeches. But in the early 2010s, North Korea's special forces began turning heads again as the regime began to posture more aggressively following the death of Kim Jong-il and the rise of the, at the time, very thoroughly memed young dictator Kim Jong-un. At a time when speculation ran rampant about the potential that North Korea might be weakening or even collapsing, the regime needed something other than nuclear tests that would help them look big and scary, and their weapon of choice was the Special Forces. In 2013, a white paper report from the US Department of Defense described the North Korean SOF as among the most highly trained, well-equipped, best-fed, and highly motivated forces in the KPA. And lest anybody think that the DoD was just selecting the shiniest among several turds, they continued, strategic SOF units dispersed across North Korea appeared designed for rapid offensive operations, internal defense against foreign attacks, or limited attacks against vulnerable targets in the ROK as part of a coercive diplomacy effort. They operate in specialized units, including reconnaissance, airborne and seaborne insertion, commandos, and other specialties. All emphasize speed of movement and surprise attack to accomplish their missions. To put it simply, North Korea had acquired a highly versatile military force that seemed genuinely capable of accomplishing a wide range of mission roles offensively against the South. In 2014, the speculation continued, with South Korea's own intelligence releases suggesting that the special forces in North Korea might comprise over 200,000 soldiers, a larger active military force in special operations soldiers alone than the entire military of the United Kingdom, Israel, Taiwan, or Germany of the modern day. North Korea was putting up unbelievable numbers, the kind that allowed it to be a continued threat in the 21st century despite crushing international sanctions. In the years since, they've appeared in military parades, promotional videos, and propaganda pieces produced by the regime, who've no doubt picked up on the fact that the special forces seem to inspire concern in Western audiences that the regular North Korean military simply doesn't anymore. They're not regiments who are supposed to be able to face down the South Korean army, let alone the Americans, in direct combat. They are, as the North Korean army has described them, human bombs protecting the center of the revolution. On paper, North Korea's military might appear quite powerful. According to one report by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, North Korea is believed to have upward of 4,000 tanks, 2,500 armored vehicles, 5,500 multiple rocket launchers, 400 combat-worthy vessels, and over 700 combat-capable aircraft and helicopters, although these figures haven't been adjusted to reflect North Korea's recent arms sales. But in reality, much of that equipment is badly out of date, a sort of vintage amalgamation of Soviet-era tech that would still do a number on, say, a lone unarmed person, but can't reasonably be expected to overwhelm a foreign military as powerful as South Korea's. At a certain point, sheer numbers on the North Korean side can't make up for a relative gap in quality, and a gap that North Korea has no real means to address with their existing equipment. But North Korea's special forces introduce a whole new dimension to a potential conflict with the South, because of their potential to misdirect, surprise, sabotage, and counterattack South Korean military forces, and sow chaos in any defensive or offensive action that South Korea might try and carry out. As the DoD report we quoted before had established, the North Korean SOF are meant specifically to infiltrate South Korea in the event of large-scale hostilities, attacking vulnerable targets, engaging in reconnaissance and raids, and nipping at the heels of a potential South Korean counteroffensive into the north. Combine that mission objective with the reality that these units have had nothing to do in North Korea for decades except to study intelligence, formulate plans of attack, and practice the specific operations that a certain detachment or unit would be assigned to, and it stands to reason that these operatives would probably be rather good at their jobs. As for how personnel are divided within the force, an analysis by the open-source intelligence company Janes has indicated that according to South Korean, American, and international intelligence, the North Korean special forces are subdivided into two main categories: the light infantry, including 140,000 troops, and the 11th Storm Corps, including the remaining 60,000 troops. Within the overarching light infantry umbrella, the force is further subdivided into 7 light infantry divisions, 5 to 7 reconnaissance battalions, 12 light infantry or mechanized battalions meant to act as shock troops on the front lines, and 3 specialized reconnaissance brigades to gather intelligence, carry out sabotage and assassinations. The force also includes 3 airborne brigades to block and defend beachheads where North Korea would land its regular troops, and 7 sniper brigades, including 3 for the Army, 2 for the Navy, and 2 for the Air Force. Those snipers are meant to disguise themselves as South Koreans, attack vulnerable outposts, and foment a revolt among ordinary South Koreans. Over in the Storm Corps, troops trained specifically to undertake unconventional warfare operations, including directing other special operations units and carrying out highly complex missions inside South Korea. Not individual hit-and-run attacks, for example, but prolonged campaigns behind enemy lines with minimal support. As for their specific targets, the Special Forces are believed to be optimized for targeting of the joint American and South Korean intelligence and reconnaissance apparatus inside South Korea, conducting attacks on air bases and neutralizing American and South Korean ballistic missiles and weapons of mass destruction. American bases in Japan are also thought to be in the North Korean Special Forces crosshairs, as are a stretch of islands in Korea's West Sea. Whether the Special Forces targets are entirely military is unknown. In a state of total war, it's possible that these units could carry out attacks against economic or infrastructural targets, or even against civilians. Whatever their purpose, though, it is clear that every detachment within the Special Forces is expected to be able to manage its own operations and keep itself going with less than ideal levels of support for long stretches of time. From their appearances in military parades, satellite imagery of their training grounds, and intelligence sources, it's clear that the Special Forces get privileged access to some hardware that most North Korean forces can only dream of. At the top of that list, realistically speaking, is food. While most North Korean military personnel eat better than the average civilian, there's a big difference between eating better than the peasant class and eating well. The Special Forces, though, they eat well, and they've got open access to North Korea's armories as well. The Special Forces are allotted more modern planes that can deliver them by parachute behind enemy lines in South Korea in the event of an attack, and they're believed to operate on bases that utilize underground runways that would be harder for South Korea to target. The Storm Corps is believed to have access to several classes of submarine, including a series of high-speed, semi-submersible landing craft that could transport thousands of operatives if used together. Their forces are trained for urban warfare, mountain warfare, nighttime warfare, and the wealth of snipers at their disposal suggests that they're equipped both for asymmetrical guerrilla-style attacks and for grueling operations that could turn the city of Seoul into the city of Sarajevo. And uniquely, among North Korea's highly dogmatic military ranks, the special forces are believed to be designed to operate outside the box. Their units include large numbers of women who are believed to be trained and are ready to serve in combat roles alongside their male brethren. They're highly interdisciplinary, unifying naval, aerial, covert, and shock troop elements under the same roof, and they're believed to be able to interface with North Korea's cyber warfare units in order to coordinate attacks. They're able to utilize propeller-driven biplanes made from cloth and wood, which may seem incredibly archaic, but are also basically invisible to radar. Their reconnaissance agents are trained in psychological warfare, document forgery, and kidnapping of both military and civilian VIPs, enabling the sort of head of state hostage crises that are usually regarded as the stuff of Hollywood legend. They're believed to have more than enough stolen and replicated American and South Korean uniforms to disguise large numbers of troops, and they're optimized to operate in very small units, as small as just 3 to 5 troops in the smallest unit formations. Finally, they're believed to have both biological and chemical weapons at their disposal, including weaponized anthrax, mustard gas, sarin, and more. When it comes to a final evaluation of the North Korean Special Operations Forces, there's one lingering question that hangs above all the others. Are they actually any good? Now, we obviously can't speak to operations that we don't know about, perhaps small infiltrations into South Korea or quiet incidents on outlying coastal islands that neither Korea would like to tell the world about. But as far as we know, these units haven't seen active combat since the 1960s. With a completely untested force like that, it's impossible to know whether they're on the level of some of the best operators around the world or just a mere paper tiger. One American ex-Green Beret who had served in South Korea, speaking anonymously to Business Insider, suggested that by his own analysis, the North Korean SOF would be a challenge to deal with in a full-scale war. As that former soldier was quoted as saying, "We have the technological advantage, and our planes and missiles can bomb them back to the Stone Age, but they will be fighting for their god." Since birth, they've been brought up in this cultish environment where the supreme leader is their god. They are fanatical and tough. Korean winters are no joke, and these guys have been trained to survive and operate in such environments. They would fight to the last man. Obviously, this is just one relatively knowledgeable person's opinion, but it does stand to reason that North Korea's most elite special forces operatives will be thoroughly indoctrinated to the supreme leader's cause and will be disinclined to play nicely against the South or to capitulate unless absolutely necessary. We've also got to point out that, uniquely for a special operations force that's been inert for so long, North Korean SOF has decades to focus on a single enemy. Unlike nations like the US, China, or Russia, North Korea has no reason or means to project power around the world, and unlike elite troops in other nations, North Korea has no meaningful internal rebellions and only one nearby neighbor that it would consider a military threat. With no distractions and no competing objectives, North Korean special forces have had basically unlimited time to prep attacks on known, easily observable targets, some of which can even be seen across the DMZ. Now, of course, this isn't necessarily a good thing for them. Tunnel vision can be crippling for any military force, and 50 years of tunnel vision is a whole other matter. But if these SOF troops are able to adjust to new intelligence and incorporate new attack methods as they become available, then they could be a very dangerous opponent for South Korea, crouched and waiting to strike at the first opportunity. Hopefully, the world will never need to find out whether or not North Korea's special forces are any good. With South Korea, the US, Japan, and other nations nearby increasingly putting up defenses against China, and thus North Korea, it's possible that the long-anticipated conclusion to the Korean conflict might come via a whimper rather than a bang. But if hostilities do one day break out again in force, then it'll be North Korea's special operations forces behind enemy lines. What they do in that situation, we simply won't know unless we watch it happen.